Hey there YouTube, welcome to the ACH Automotive channel. Have a diagnostic video for you guys today. We're working on our 2017 Ram 1500. It's the 5.7 liter Hemi. And for the past few months, I've largely ignored the fact that the fuel gauge only works when the tank is completely full. It started off sporadic where, it would get to like half a tank and then it would cut out, and, then it progressively got worse. And it produces a check engine light, which produces a code or a DTC of P0463, fuel level sensor 1 circuit high. What I'm going to go through today is how do we prove, well, we could do one of two things. Most likely it's the sensor in the tank. And that's pretty much what all the other videos for this truck show, of guys just replacing the sensor in the tank. And I could go that route, but it's a mess of work to take the tank out or lift the bed off and get access to the top of the tank. This sensor is in the fuel pump unit, which is inside the tank. If you have a Tech Authority subscription or a ALL-Data DIY or any of those types of subscriptions that'll give you wiring diagrams and steps to take to troubleshoot, you can kind of follow along with what I'm going to do here to show you, to prove that it is the sensor in the tank. All you'll basically need for this is a multimeter or a digital voltmeter like this, some long leads, and I also have a Phil's electrical probe. If you have something like that, that will be handy for the BCM side of things. Let's take a look at what we have to do to test out this circuit. A couple housekeeping items. You can see I have the truck jacked up. The right rear wheel is off of it. I do have a jack stand under there for those of you concerned about that stuff. That is important. Pulling the fender well, inner fender well, there's about, I don't know, a dozen 8mm bolts. Pull the tire, obviously, and then you can see right in on top of the fuel tank where we need to go here. This is the harness. There are two wires that we are concerned about. There are the two center wires. There's the black wire, which is the ground side or the return side of the sensor circuit, and that is circuit G109. And there's the dark blue with a white stripe wire, which is the positive side or the signal side of the sensor circuit. We want to check voltages on those. We want to check continuity, resistance on the lines from this plug all the way back to the plug to the BCM, and verify there's no high resistance or breaks or anything like that in the wire. The first portion of the circuit that we're going to test here, we're going to test our dark blue wire with a white stripe. That's the positive side of the circuit. Unplugged from the fuel pump module or the top of the fuel tank, you should read battery voltage or very close to it, which would be about 12 volts. That's because there is a pull-up resistor in series somehow with this circuit. You should also read on the negative side, when you go from here with the negative side of your meter to the positive terminal on the battery, you should also read about 12 volts or battery voltage with it disconnected. If you read, and that's verifying that the circuit is functioning. Once you plug this in, on the blue wire, you should read voltage based upon the level of fuel in the tank. And what I mean by voltage based on the level of fuel in the tank is that the lower the voltage, the higher the fuel level in the tank. The higher the voltage, the lower the fuel level in the tank. So it should read, with a full tank, that blue wire should read around 1 volt. An empty tank should read around 10.5 to 11 volts. And I say the blue wire, the positive side of the circuit, is quite literally the easiest side to test, because you have the ground, the chassis ground right here that you can grab with the negative side of your meter, and then you can back probe the dark blue white wire up at the top of the connector. So I've got it disconnected. Let's verify it reads 12 volts. And then we'll plug it in and see what it reads. You'll need your key on for this test. So right now it's disconnected. It's on the dark blue wire, positive side of the meter. Negative side is on the chassis ground. And you can see it reads roughly 11.8 volts. We'll call it 12, close enough. You do, like I said, you do need the key on for this. If we plug this back in here, There we go. See, it hasn't, the voltage hasn't changed. That should read, because this tank is almost full, it should read around 1 volt plus or minus, depending on exactly how full the tank is. So that right there is telling me there's something wrong with one side of the sensor. Based on the troubleshooting steps, it would be the return side of the sensor, I believe. So let's move to the other side of the sensor and see what it reads. And you can see on my cluster here, the key is in the run position. I have the yellow fuel light flashing for low fuel. My message indicator check engine light is on, and the fuel gauge, even though the tank is just about full, is reading empty. I'm going to shut the key off here for a minute. Pull it out so it doesn't ding. We'll pop the hood. Always gotta have the Powerade. Love the purple Powerade. Let's come up front here. And this is where you're gonna need some extra long leads. You're gonna need to go from the positive side of the battery here to your meter. And then we're gonna have to check the black wire, the G109 circuit, all the way back here. So let me set that up and I'll show you. Testing the negative side of the circuit here between the negative side and the battery positive. We read about 12.2 volts or battery voltage. This is where it helps to have a long test lead, which I don't have, so I've kind of got one made up. We've got the positive side of meter on the positive side of the battery. And if you come back here, we have the negative side of the meter on the negative side of the circuit, and it is unplugged, so let's plug it back in here. And if things were working, this should drop to an appropriate voltage, and it doesn't. So we know right now the code is set and the light is on, that it does not drop to the appropriate voltage reading. Now we can go on and test the resistance of each side of the circuit to make sure there are no broken wires, no shorts, etc., and kind of rule out you know, that the wiring is the problem. We can also then go on to read across the sensor itself. There's no real good way to do this. I'll show you how to do it, how I did it. You know, you should be able to read a a resistance value based on the level of fuel in the tank. So let's take a look at that and see what we find out. We're using our X-Tech multimeter 410. You can use pretty much any digital voltmeter that'll do resistance or continuity testing. We're going to put it on the 200 ohm scale here. So select that. Now I've already checked. You always want to check your leads before you start testing, and you can do that just by shorting them together before you connect them to anything. Should read like 0.0 ohms or 0.1 ohms. It should be very, very low. I've been burned by that recently as I've been learning how to do this stuff. So you want to make sure, you want to test that. I've already done that. We don't need our positive side. That can go down to the tank. We are going to test the dark blue wire with the white stripe first. That is the N4 circuit, or the send to the sensor side of the circuit. That's the positive side of the circuit. I've got my Phil's electrical probe up there on that C5/E connector. I believe it's pin 16, and you can see the BCM is way up there. It's really not too bad to get your hand up there and disconnect it. You can't really back probe it, so that's why I'm using my Phil's electrical probe. There's just no room, and I'm not taking the whole connector apart. So I've got the negative side of my multimeter down here. It really doesn't matter for this test what you use. Got my, I love my Milwaukee light. This is very handy if you want to pick one up there. Great magnetic little light there, I like them. We've got our X-Tech meter here, and we're going to come back to the underside of this truck. I'm going to put my light up there, and hopefully you guys can see. I got a light on the camera now too. We're going to connect the other side, the positive side, to the dark blue white stripe wire down here. And I've got just a back probe. You don't want to front probe a connector. It can, especially if you don't have the right receiving plug on it. So we've got it back probed on the dark blue white stripe wire. Let's take a look at our meter over here. And we're reading 0.9 ohms, which is probably the resistance in our leads and the wire. It's pretty low. I'd say that circuit's pretty good. Let's move over to our G109 circuit, which is the black wire, the negative side of the circuit, and take a look at what the resistance is on that side. Back over here, we'll switch this in first since my light's down here already. We're gonna move up one to the black wire, and again, I don't know if I can do this with holding the camera in one hand here. There we go. Let's go back up here to the underside of our truck, or the interior of the truck here, and we're gonna move our probe. And one thing to note with this probe, you pull it back to disengage it. So we are gonna move that back. And we're gonna find our other wire here. And they do make smaller probes, not necessarily the Phil's one. There we go. They do make smaller probes that'll be a little easier to get under here. Some guys don't like these because they do pierce the wires, but this is what I have, and it does work. So we're on the G109 side of the circuit, the black wire, going all the way back to our fuel pump module. On the G109 side, this is the black wire. This is the negative side of the circuit. It reads 0.8, 0.9. Close enough. Very little resistance, very low resistance. Wire checks out pretty good. Next step that we're going to take here, this will be the final step for our resistance check. You really can't get your probes onto the terminal itself. So with our connector disconnected at the BCM, we're going to plug the harness back into the top of the fuel pump, and we're going to read across the G109 pin, which is the black wire, and we're going to read across the N4 pin, which is the dark blue and the white wire. You should, if there is, if the sensor is working correctly, you should, let me find my chart here, you should be able to read what the resistance is that the sensor is detecting right now. Now we know that this tank is almost full. It's probably about 90% full. So there goes all my papers because it's a windy day. Hope you don't mind a full close-up there. It is a, let me find my table here. So our full tank should read right around, right around 93 ohms to 51 ohms, somewhere in that range. We're, like I said, about 90% full, which is where this starts to goof up. This is for the primary tank. There's a couple of different tank configurations that you can get with this truck. It could also read somewhere between 59 and 109 ohms. So if we were to read somewhere between 51 and 93 or 59 and 109, we know that the sensor is functioning properly. Let's go disconnect our Phil's electrical probe from our BCM harness and move back here and see what we see as far as resistance goes. If we don't see any resistance, we can assume that the sensor is open and bad. Moving back here to our connector again, I'm going to back probe these two, the dark blue white stripe wire and the black wire. It doesn't really matter which side of the meter you put it on. So you can see I got both back probe pins there. And then we're going to stick the harness back into the tank. And this side of the harness you should not read any resistance on because it's disconnected up at the front of the truck. So it's not doing anything right now. So we should be able to theoretically read any kind of resistance between these two pins here. And that should be close to what the resistance should be for like a 90% full tank. And you can see I don't read anything across here. Nothing's nothing's registering, which tells me that the sensor is open in the tank and is more than likely bad. All right, additionally, one more thing we can check. We can look at what the voltage the computer is seeing. Now, on the scan tool, it is scaled, so it'll read between 0.5 volts for a full tank or 4.5 volts for an empty tank. And I'm going to use AlfaOBD because that's what I have. You can use any scan tool that has or supports these PIDs. I have my OBD Link MX Plus dongle down there plugged in. We're going to select Dodge Ram 1500 engine, and it's going to be the Hemi V8. So we'll click connect here. Give it a second. There we go. Okay. So now we need to go to the plotted data tab. Let's make this big. We'll go to meters. We're gonna, oops, don't click on things that you don't want to click on. We are going to activate all of them so we can look at the data. Start scan. We need to come over all the way to tab 25, I believe it is. And at the bottom, you can see it reads 4.980 volts. Now again, I said this was scaled. It caps out at 5 volts for an open circuit, which is why the gauge reads empty. Chrysler does have some tools that you can use to manipulate the computer. I don't have them. I looked to purchase them for this video, and they are about $680 to $700, depending on where you get them from. They're simply low voltage electrical test leads with some resistors built into them and a switch, so you can switch the resistance values and see what the computer does, and that will verify your circuit. Now, I'm not spending $700 for one job. It just doesn't seem, and there's definitely not $700 worth of parts in this kit. So we can look at this with our diagnostic computer. We can look at it with our digital voltmeter. I'd personally rather spend the money on a good digital voltmeter than the kit that Chrysler has for this, and take a look at your resistance on the wires and make a pretty close educated guess based on what you see with your voltmeter by checking the resistances and voltages, etc. So that's kind of the way we are going to go with this. I just wanted to show you that you could also use the computer to look at the value here, and this does work. You can see it was 0.80, and that was when I read it earlier, before the light came on this morning, so, or the check engine light, the DTC set. We can actually, let's look at status and faults here. Let's read all faults. Okay, P0463, and okay, yep, error light's on, obviously. Where's more info? I thought it gave you more info. Yeah. All right, this is like your freeze frame data and stuff for it. I thought they gave you more info for, also with mill on. I thought it gave you actually what the code meant. Faults found, yes. Doesn't like that. Okay. So anyway, you can take a look. You can use AlfaOBD for this and look at the plotted data and see what the voltages are. One thing we can do to confirm additionally that the sensor in the tank is bad is we can use our digital voltmeter along with AlfaOBD, and we can add some fuel to the tank. We know it's almost full, but it's not quite. And I think actually it does tell you on one of these tabs here, vapor volume, fuel level percent. Well, so this morning when it stopped working, it was at 95%, and right now it thinks it's at 16% full. So we shouldn't have to add a whole heck of a lot of fuel to get this light to come off and see what our sensor does. So let's take a look at that and see what happens. Let's put a little bit of fuel in here. Added just a little bit of gas, enough to clear our low fuel error and make our gauge go full again. You can see hopefully that over there. I topped our tank off quite a bit more, just with a 5-gallon can I had here. You can see the computer is interpreting that it's 0.608 volts coming out of the sensor, and you can see the level percent is 100% full. So we're at max capacity. You can also come down here and look at our meter. We're reading 1.3 volts. This is pretty close to spec. Full on the meter should read roughly 1 volt, and full on the computer, because it's scaled, should read about a 0.5 volt. So we're pretty close in spec. A little bit off, a little higher than what what spec is. On the computer, full should read about 0.5 volt, and on the meter, full should read about 1 volt. The computer is scaled from for 0.5 volts for full and 4.5 volts for dead empty, whereas the signal coming right out of the meter should be 1 volt for full, 12 volts for empty, or I think it goes to 10.5. There's a couple of different theories on it. Higher the voltage, the lower the fuel level in the tank, so the emptier your tank is. The lower the voltage, the higher the fuel level, or the more fuel that you have in the tank. So we're pretty close to spec. We can rerun our test now that we have cleared the error. I think the easiest one to run would be to disconnect our BCM harness C5E again and see if we can read resistance across the 2 terminals at the top of the fuel pump for resistance, and see if we get a resistance value that's in the table for our fuel level sensor. Pretty confident at this point. You add fuel, the error goes away. You take fuel away, the error comes back. There's only one moving part in this circuit, and it's very duplicatable. Pretty confident it is the fuel level sensor in this truck that's failing. All right, this is the very last check that we're going to do on this. You can see that the meter is reading 51 ohms, which according to our Tech Connect table here is the full stop max full travel should read about 51.1 ohms of resistance. And what I have in here is I've disconnected the harness at the BCM, and I'm just back probing, so there's nothing else in circuit here. It's literally just reading across the G109 and the N4 terminals. So you can see with the tank within an absolute full tank, it is within spec. When the error happens, or when it occurs, it trips the code. I can't read anything across the sensor, so it's wide open. So I am very confident that the fuel level sensor in this truck has failed or is in the process of failing, and we're going to have to replace that. So that will be part 2 of this video. This was part 1. So I guess the next step, part 2 to this video, will be actually replacing the whole unit. There's 2 ways you can do it. You can either buy the whole fuel pump assembly with the new float, etc., and drop that in, or you can get the fuel level sensor, which some people claim it's not replaceable, but Chrysler will sell it to you, and TechConnect does state that you can remove it from the fuel pump assembly. So there's quite a price difference. The whole unit I think is like $290 and the sensor is like $120. So but this truck has 74,000 miles on it. The pumps don't generally fail. I haven't decided exactly what I'm going to do yet, whether I'll buy the whole thing. I may buy the whole thing simply just because I know my luck of I'll go through all the work of dropping the tank and then the pump will fail. So we may just change the whole assembly to be a lot quicker, and then I'll have 2 on the bench, the good one and the bad one, and I can show you exactly what it looks like. There's you have a float in the tank that floats up and down, and basically a needle on a circuit board without basic description of it without actually having something to show you, and they can get bad spots on that circuit board. Think of a potentiometer on an old school radio where you might have to wiggle it back and forth to you might lose a channel or something like that. It's kind of similar topic. So that'll be part 2 to this project. I've got to order it. I don't have the stuff in hand because I wanted to do some troubleshooting to verify that was the case here. And I am very confident that that is the issue at this point. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe below. You can follow along on social media at achautomotive, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, etc. trying to get more into the diagnostic videos, and you know, took this as an option or an opportunity to show you guys how to do it. Lots of videos on YouTube on how to replace the sensor and the fuel pump on this truck. I don't think I've come across anybody really that showed how to go through the diagnostic steps to verify it was the sensor. I mean, this is not just a 5-minute thing to, unbolt it and throw a new one in and see if it works. This is, you got to drop the gas tank or take the bed off the truck. It's a process. So I really wanted to be sure that we were going in the right direction and not down a rabbit hole. So there goes my notes. So that's how I'm going to end this video. If you like it, guys, please like and subscribe below. If something you want to know, leave me a comment, and I'll see you in the next video.